It's just an abandoned mental hospital. What could possibly go wrong? Washington State. Trees, mountains, water. A lot of water. In 1909, the Northern State Hospital was established near 𝘴𝘰𝘤𝘪𝘢 in Skagit County, right smack in the upper northwest corner of Washington. Originally, this place wasn't even called Northern State Hospital. It was known as the Western State Farm for the Mentally Insane. Now, it's kind of weird that I just said that we were talking about the Northern State Hospital, but I said Western. And while it is weird, there's a reason for it. When this place was originally built, the Western State Hospital was basically the only functioning state psychiatric hospital in Washington, and it was getting absolutely slammed with patients at the time. So instead of expanding that hospital, officials came up with another plan. They were like, what if we moved the non-violent patients somewhere else? Problem solved, right? Now, community officials genuinely believed fresh air, farming, discipline, and labor could improve people's mental health, so they obviously thought this was a great idea. And because of that, nothing could be more therapeutic than being dropped on a farm in the absolute middle of nowhere, miles away from any family, friends, anything. So it's a great idea, right? Totally not because they didn't just want to build another hospital or even expand the one that they owned. Definitely not that part. So 1911 comes around. We finally get the first patients to arrive on property. And you would think that these individuals would be arriving to a already well-built and beautiful maintained building, right? Right, guys? Of course not. In 1911, 101 men basically stepped into an open field. Before there were patients, they became builders. Now, these people are still classified as nonviolent mental institute patients. So they had these men doing log clearing. They would dig roads, plant crops, which is probably the real reason that they thought they were getting moved so far away. And mind you, Western State is a solid 4-hour drive. So that's a hell of a lot of driving, especially in 1911. You're on a horse. I mean, I'm sure. There were cars, but you know. But anyways, slowly but steadily, they would continue to build Northern State Hospital. Of course, you would think, wow, mental health patients—they're doing a lot. They seem to be well built, well off, nothing too bad off with them, right? Well, in the 1900s, it did not take much to get put in an institution. For instance, anxious, it's all because you're mentally ill. You're gay, it's obviously because you're mentally ill. You got a morphine addiction, it's obviously because you're mentally ill. Money problems, mentally ill. Every fucking thing gets you tossed into this place. You have this weird feeling in your gut, gone. You're getting put in. All right. And according to admission records, people would be to this specific hospital would be institutionalized for alcoholism, religious obsession, severe worry, syphilis, hereditary insanity, sunstroke, and even things listed as love affairs. So if you just recently got your heart broken, oh baby, they got a room for you. Slowly, Northern State started becoming its own town. And what I mean by that is they quite literally had everything. It started with nothing, and now we have bakeries, any kind of animal you could think of farm, laundry, workshops, recreational halls, barbershop, beauty salons, a fire department. It even had its own powerhouse and water system. It literally had everything you could think of in a small town. It had as well, just within this community that was just supposed to originally be a farm. The most interesting part, however, patients worked many of these jobs. Doctors called it occupational therapy, believing that working gave patients purpose and routine. Now, some patients genuinely enjoy the work. Historians argue this crossed the line into unpaid labor, which I would agree. As the hospital continued to grow, so did the number of patients. By the 1920s, over 1,000 people lived here. By the 1930s, that number doubled to 2,000. And by the 1950s, Northern State had become the largest psychiatric hospital in Washington State, housing more than 2,100 patients. A side note, most psychiatric hospitals on the East Coast followed something called the Kirkbride plan. Basically, one big building. If you've been to Eastern State, oh wait, that's a jail. JK, Waverly Sanatorium. That's what I'm talking about. Just a very large building, several floors. That's a Kirkbride plan. Now, this is a simple plan. Everybody lives inside. It's easy to keep an eye on everyone, stuff like that. Northern State, however, said, we're gonna go with something a little different. Instead, they used something called the colony plan. Instead of one massive building, they built dozens of smaller buildings spreading across the property. Patients had mountain views, sunlight, gardens, fresh air. Honestly, something very progressive for the 1900s. And Of course, this also plays into the factor of how most medical officials at this time thought fresh air could really help some people, when really all they needed to do was talk about their problems. But I'm not a doctor, so anyways, now that we've talked about this place, let's talk about the years within, things that happened while this place was in operation. So in the 1900s, we know that certain medical, I don't want to call it torture, certain medical practices were not humane. Please bear with me while I list some of the ones that were documented here at Northern State. Hydrotherapy, occupational therapy, insulin therapy, ECT or electroconvulsive therapy, early psychiatric medication. As you can probably tell, medicine during this time period was basically throwing things at a wall to see what stuck. If you don't know, hydrotherapy is basically what they would say is water therapy, but realistically, they would make this water quite hot and they would put patients in it, and those who could not withstand the heat, they would just tie them down and hold them into it until they calm down, pretty much. So you would take a bath, hot bath. Here it didn't mention boiling water, but I have heard where some things are boiling water. So of course patients would become aggravated. At some point that water is going to get to you. Occupational therapy, unpaid labor. Then you have insulin therapy. That is quite literally just putting you in a coma. Okay, you don't need insulin, it's gonna fuck you up. And ECT is being shocked. ECT is done today only in certain circumstances, and it's done under anesthesia. Now, a familiar or a famous medical procedure that I did not mention on this list is the lobotomy. During this time, Washington as a whole, all hospitals would perform lobotomies. And I shouldn't say all, but a good chunk of them would perform lobotomies. But the records here are largely sealed, or they've been destroyed or lost. There's a lot of miscommunication due to the way documents here were handled. So unfortunately, as somebody finds a basement full of all these documents, we will never know. We can just assume. Nowadays, medical professionals call this an experimental error. Well, obviously, because I'm sure none of us would like to have a fucking ice pick stabbed up our nose, but somebody might. I would call this error probably a horrible time to be any kind of not viewed as well. If I even show signs of being upset, I'm cooked. They're gonna stab me, Horrible time to have a mental illness. But that also brings me to my next point, which is sterilization. During this time, this would be where patients who doctors saw as unfit could be selected for sterilization. Unfortunately, women were disproportionately selected a lot, sometimes simply because they had diagnoses that today would be recognized as anxiety or depression or developmental disabilities, like very, very common things that we see today in the medical field. And men were also sterilized as well. They were a part of this. It's just sad that women took kind of the brunt of this. Officially here at Northern State, required consent from either the patient or their family would be necessary. However, when the people asking for your consent also control your housing, your food, and freedom, you really wonder how voluntary this process was, because you're we're pushing it, So while looking through some of the records online, I actually stumbled upon TB. That's right, tuberculosis era. There was a lot happening. TB spread like wildfire, and I'm talking like hundreds of thousands of people died. And it was a lot of times due to overcrowding, because unfortunately tuberculosis is spread through the air. And with that, tuberculosis spread throughout the facility quite quickly. Those who don't know what tuberculosis attacks the lungs. It spreads through the air. Anybody who has it coughs or sneezes, it's very much airborne. So the smallest cough could trigger anything. Symptoms of this could have been chronic coughing, which is the most obvious version of this. If you coughed up blood, that could be a sign. Fever, night sweats, being tired, and a lot of times people face dramatic weight loss. And before we had antibiotics for this, it was one of the deadliest diseases in America. However, Northern State tried to combat this by trying to dedicate an entire ward to people who were showing signs of TB, and it became routine for chest x-rays to become mandatory for both staff and patients. So while people tend to imagine horror stories involving experimental treatments, many patients died from very normal diseases, such as tuberculosis, influenza, pneumonia, and even heart disease was still common. After decades of operation, Northern State eventually started running into the same problem that many large psychiatric hospitals across America faced during the mid-1900s. It was getting too big. Remember, this place was originally designed around the ideal of a peaceful colony. Remember, we have the colony plan, a place where patients were exposed to fresh air, a work environment that showed them other people, basically anybody who wanted to live in a smaller community. A lot of patients here lived, breathed, and died in these walls. With that being said, The ideal begins to fall apart when the population continued to grow past their limits. They weren't building any more buildings, and while the city was still running, they still had, unfortunately, people coming in from overcrowded areas as well, which steadily overcrowded this area. The hospital was now one of the largest psychiatric institutes in Washington state, but maintaining a facility that size obviously comes with its problems. More patients meant more crowded wards, more stress on the staff, and less individual attention for people living there. At the time, the entire country was starting to rethink how mental health care worked. Thank God. For decades, the solution had been large institutions like Northern State where people could stay for years or even their entire lives. But by the 1950s and 60s, new medication and changing ideals about treatment led many doctors to believe patients could be cared for outside of hospitals. You know what that means? This period of time becomes the deinstitutionalization. Big ass word. All right, so bear with me. But deinstitutionalization. Let's talk about it. The idea behind this was that people shouldn't automatically spend their lives inside massive institutions, right? They don't be trapped within the same four walls forever. So a lot of people decided, you can take this medicine and go home. That was the problem. Many of these people weren't prepared. Many areas weren't prepared for the number of patients that left the hospital. Support systems were lacking, and many former patients struggled after leaving. Slowly, Northern State began losing its purpose. By 1973, after more than 60 years of operation, Northern State Hospital officially closed its doors. Thousands of patients who had once walked these grounds were transferred elsewhere. Employees left, and the buildings that had once been full of life slowly became empty. And this is where Northern State became the place people recognize today, an abandoned hospital. But before we get into the abandoned buildings, we need to talk about one of the darkest parts of this place, the cemetery. Now here at Northern State, the cemetery is one of the reasons this location has gained such a haunting reputation. During the hospital's decades of operation, 1,500 patients were buried on the property. Unlike a traditional cemetery where you might see large family headstones and carefully maintained graves, and many of Northern State's patients were buried with just simple markers, sometimes only identified by initials or numbers. Over time, many of those markers just disappeared. Vegetation grew over areas of the cemetery, records became harder to track down, and some of the people buried there were just basically forgotten. Thankfully, researchers, volunteers, people of great kindness have spent years working to restore those records and identify the people buried there. And honestly, this is one of the parts of Northern State that sticks with most people. Now, the fun part. So, as I was researching, I stumbled upon a rumor, one of, if not the biggest rumor surrounding the hospital. The rumor of the human remains that were dumped in a lake. Picture it, 1950s. They have their own cannery. People are dying because of tuberculosis. We gotta be tracking together. People are steadily deciding that, you know what, there's not any laws telling me what to do with this dead body. So they cremated people who didn't have relatives, who didn't have friends. They would cremate them, put them in cans, and they would put them in a back wall. What do we do with remains of dead people in a can? We dump them. That's right. 800 bodies were discovered at a funeral home. That's not the craziest part. The craziest part, there was a lake. And while this is not confirmed that these bodies came from the lake, one day somebody stumbled upon human remains in the lake. They say that there was cans, and inside those cans were the remnants of patients. There's no evidence 100% backing that those patients live there, but it is quite fascinating that there are canned individuals there. And we know that at Northern State, they canned and cremated people. So do with that with what you will. But up until the 60s, they basically, if the body wasn't claimed, they could do whatever they wanted with the body. So a lot of people ended up as basically cadavers for Washington State University. Some of them ended up in a lake apparently, and a lot of them just got tossed in the backyard just to be labeled a number. But with the cans that they did find, they did give each of them individual proper burial grounds, which is good. Now let's talk about tunnel system. That's right, there was a tunnel system here, and it's not for like the same reason that you may think that like normal tunnel systems are there. It was actually meant for like piping and things of that sort. There wasn't nobody hiding in them, but people definitely hide those fucking things now. That's for sure. The hospital campus was enormous, genuinely. I mean, it's huge. If you ever go there, it's a state park. Crazy, I know, right? I think everything in this fucking state's a state park. I mean, I've been to several abandoned locations here in Washington. Every single one of them, damn near a state park. It's fascinating. But the campus is huge. It's not just one building. Quite literally is on hundreds of acres. It's insane. But because it's so big, it had to have utilities between each building, which were where these tunnels come from. They were mainly used for things like steam pipes, water lines, and even other infrastructures like hospital running. Over the years, explorers have reported entering some of these underground areas and finding dark corridors, old equipment, and even forgotten sections of the campus. Some people even claim that there's hidden rooms throughout this. This place is quite large, so if you go, please be respectful. They want to keep this as well maintained as you can. As old as this. When we went, super cool. We only explored the farming area of it. I do plan to go back soon so I can explore the hospital. Now, the fun part, for real. The paranormal portion. So, obviously, a lot of people died here. And while I am a big believer in historical things, and I am a history buff, that's right. No, I'm just kidding. I love history, but that's not important. What's important is there's a lot of presence here. I would love to do a paranormal reading here with a friend of mine if she'll ever come to Washington, because 1,500 people died. That's not the full body count either. 1,500 people that we know of died here on the property. There is a lot that goes on. Noises. There's a sense of somebody watching. There's a lot of paranormal activity, I believe, here. It is genuinely a fascinating place if you would like to experience in the daylight, of course. Closer you get to nighttime, the worse it gets. And with that, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Visitors and explorers, they continue to experience strange things. There's reports of footsteps in empty hallways, voices coming from abandoned rooms, shadows moving through buildings, and lights appearing where there shouldn't be any electricity. There is damn near nothing out there to run electricity. Part of the parking lot is quite literally a memorial for like veterans, I think. So God only knows what exists out there. When I go back, I'll update this video and I'll see what there is. I guess I'll put a paranormal section in my channel and I will post an update there about this activity and I'll see what I can find. I hope you guys like this video. I know it's been a long time since I've even posted on this channel because life got stupid and so did I. But of course, if you guys really liked it, I would love for you to subscribe. That'd be great. If you have been here, please leave down your experience below in the comments. I would love to hear more stories. If you have any more history, please leave that down below. And happy exploring. See you guys in my next video. Bye! Angel boy, don't say that. Never gonna stand a chance. Heartbreak like a sad romance. Said that you never come